Mic check 1 2 1 2. This is the Running with WARR show, your trusted source in fun and informative basketball talk. As you can see it right there on the bottom of the screen, that means it's true. I'm your man Kyle Means, editorial director of WARR Media. With me, I got two of my original runners, Drew and Josh, always riding with me. Appreciate that. And today we got a first time runner, very accomplished and trusted resource on Bulls, everything Chicago Bulls. Mr. Rob Schaefer of NBC Sports Chicago. Glad to have you on with us for the next hour or so, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. It's always a pleasure to chop it up with all y'all individually, and I guess this is my first run in the group, so it should be a good time.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, Rob has been on with Josh a couple times on the Interscope podcast, so he's been a friend to WARR Media for a while now. We appreciate that definitely. But it's been an interesting time now, of course, as always in basketball coverage. We spent a lot of time, me and Drew, on our show yesterday talking about the Sky. So if any of y'all, it's halftime of that game. If you want to, just rock with us for a little bit during halftime, or keep us on, keep the game on mute like I'm doing, and watch, rock with us through the second half. I think the Sky got it. You ain't got to worry about jinxing them or nothing. But we got playoff basketball actually materializing here in Chicago with that great Sky team, and that's what we're looking for from the men's team as well, the Bulls. A lot of big moves made in the offseason, really extending back to the regular season and the trade deadline. This is a team that has been completely reformed in a lot of ways, a lot of talent infused from other teams, veteran talent to mix in with the younger guys who are looking for their first substantial playoff experience, chief among them being Zach LaVine. And, Rob, let's start off, man. You were at Media Day yesterday, our first proper introduction to the team. We got to see the guys in the jerseys and everything, the numbers and everything. And, you have practice today as well, just letting the media observe practice in a more regular sense now again. So, from your time with the team over the last day or so, what were some of your primary observances, and what were some of the things that really, stuck to you from seeing these new guys and new and old guys, with the team?
Yeah, so from Media Day, I think the biggest takeaway was obviously vibes are good, spirits are high. There's a lot of reason to be optimistic about this team, and there's a lot of excitement with all the new additions from everybody on the roster. Obviously, Arturas Karnisovas and Billy Donovan, but also, Zach LaVine, to hear him talk excitedly about the additions and about the season ahead is big, considering he's in a contract year and such. But bigger than optimism, which, every team, unless you're the Philadelphia 76ers, can afford to have on Media Day, bigger than that was kind of how cautiously the Bulls seem to be treating setting expectations for the season. Not because I don't think that's because there's not internal belief or confidence, but just because you've kind of seen, as you mentioned, Kyle, the trade deadline acquisition last year of Nikola Vucevic, that looked great on paper. It didn't translate to even a play-in berth. So I think there's a consciousness around the team of, let's take this day by day. We still have a lot to prove. The work is just getting started in terms of getting these guys accustomed with each other, gelling with each other. So I think that was certainly a palpable dynamic, kind of just treating Media Day as business as usual, and kind of treating it with a tempered temperament, as opposed to in the past where you might see, I remember, I think it was, I wasn't covering the team at the time, but at Media Day in 2019, I think, Jim Boylan sat up there and made pretty steadfast playoff expectations. Those are the types of things that blow up in the face when things don't work out. I think just the professionalism of the way it was handled this time around stood out. And then that carried over into practice today. I mean, we talked to the presumptive starting five at media day: Vooch, Zach, DeMar, Lonzo, and Patrick. And then today we talked to Kobe for the first time since he tore his labrum. He's obviously been rehabilitating that injury, but there's a patience, there's an assured confidence. There's a lot of stuff we can get into the nitty gritty of kind of how these Bulls might play and kind of what is important to them. But for the time being, yeah, that kind of tempered optimism, I think, is the right approach for this team. I think it's one fans can appreciate until we've actually seen what they're going to look like on the court and how fast this thing is going to come together. There's a lot of potential there. It's just a question of what the timeline on them reaching that potential is going to be. And yeah, there's a lot of potential. And
tempered. Go ahead.
Sorry, I got a little feedback. I thought when he was cutting in, but it was my echo.
That's me over here. Don't worry about it. But I say producing and hosting at the same time. I love it. But anyway, tempered is a good word, and managing expectations would seem to be a key thing for the Bulls to do right now, because we haven't seen the team be this active in free agency and trades in a while, be this quote unquote successful in getting guys that they actually wanted to get. There's been a lot of talk about we've done it here on this show, and other people have done it, about the changing of the way that the team is observed now across the league. It's a place where free agents actually feel tempted to go now, and that's seemed to be the case with Lonzo. Lonzo spoke yesterday saying that just about as long as the Bulls have had an eye on him, he's had an eye on the Bulls, and it's important that the Bulls are a team and a franchise that is yearned after again, and it means a lot. But with being said, it's from the outside looking in, it seems like they just pulled in a bunch of guys. Like, they just pulled in all the guys that they could, and we gonna see. We got a couple forwards here. We got about 6 or 7 guards now. We got a couple of big guys. How is this all going to work chemistry wise? You read about it, Rob. I see Casey Johnson got a big piece today about the chemistry issues that AK and Billy Donovan are going to have to navigate in keeping and building this, not building the team, but refining the team as we get through this this short, relatively short preseason and the early part of the season. To that degree, what are your thoughts on the way that this team is built, and from position to position, and the potential there for chemistry issues, or maybe surprising matchups, and not matchups, but surprising lineups and such that could make the Bulls really a more dangerous team in general.
Yeah, well, obviously personnel wise, it's a complete flip from where we were at the end of last year, when the Bulls had too many bigs and they were playing at a super slow pace. Now they want to play faster. They want to play smaller. They're also by necessity going to have to play smaller, especially if Patrick Williams ends up missing any regular season time, because that's your starting four. And his injury, or maybe injury scare, kind of depends on what this timeline ends up being. It's kind of a reminder of how thin that front court rotation is. But I think the one thing you could say, even if it does feel like it's a little bit of a hodgepodge of different positions and different types of players, the one thing you could say that was kind of a permeating trend, at least on media day, was the talk of unselfishness and the talk of kind of high IQ basketball players. Now, the unselfish aspect is an easy thing to talk about on media day before we're actually in the weeds here in training camp and preseason and the regular season. So it's probably too soon to see how the offense specifically is going to balance with 3 guys with the scoring acumen of Zach and DeMar and Vooch, and even Lonzo you could toss in there too, as a guy who's averaged 15 points a game in the league. Kobe White when he comes back, Patrick Williams if he takes a step forward offensively, and on and on. But I think the talk of high IQ basketball players and versatility from Arturas, from Billy, from even the players that we spoke to, it really kind of gives you an idea subtly of what management thought of the roster coming into last season. Like, they wanted to make this team tougher pretty clearly. They wanted to make this team, of a higher level of basketball feel, I guess you could call it. Wanted more playmakers, more reliable guys out there. Obviously, this team was in the bottom of the league in turnover rate last year. They were in the bottom of the league in fourth quarter execution by a number of different metrics. So getting more veteran guys, getting more established guys, and getting guys that have multifaceted skill sets like any of DeMar, Zach, Vooch, Kobe, Lonzo, Pat, any of these guys can put the ball on the floor and create for themselves or others in various capacities. But the one thing Arturas said is that's going to make them very difficult to guard, just not being able to game plan for one specific person on a nightly basis. So in that sense, I think the fit on paper is great, especially offensively. The talent is there. But as we've been alluding to, it's just going to take time to see how these guys are actually going to mesh together. There was no sense among the Bulls, and there shouldn't be on media day, that there are going to be ego issues or issues with guys, sacrificing statistics or usage here or there in pursuit of winning. Everyone seems to be pretty on the same accord there. And that kind of speaks to what DeMar talked about at his intro press conference about a lot of these guys having chips on their shoulders, Zach and Lonzo specifically, even Vooch. These are accomplished individual players, but just haven't won at a high level in the league. So that gives you some hope. But we really got to see it in practice before we can know that for sure. I think the solace is at least they have players on the roster now that can do a lot of different things, as opposed to you just had not just one-way players populating the roster last year and populating key spots on the roster last year, but you had guys that really had, very narrow ways of impacting a game. I hate to single him out, but Lauri Markkanen comes to mind as a guy who's gone now but was once here. If the jumper wasn't falling, how was he impacting the game? Now you look at the guys that are in kind of the marquee positions on the roster, and you could say, Lonzo could score 6 to 8 points in a game, and he could still impact, the contest with his playmaking and his defense. You could say the same about DeMar from a playmaking perspective. So I think that's where you take solace in that, at least basketball-wise, there are ways to mix and match. The questions are going to be, chemistry, feel for each other. We saw that be a problem last year with Zach and Vooch. And then obviously Zach goes on the COVID list and everything like that. So that'll be an issue. And then defense will be an issue. But Billy Donovan's a pretty good defensive coach historically, and he's a pretty good player relationship guy historically. So I think they're in good hands there. It's just a matter of seeing how it looks in practice, which, as frustrating as it is, we're still probably a couple weeks away from having any ironclad takeaways there. For now, we're kind of relegated to having to take guys' words for it that they are bonding and getting along as well as they say they are. So that's obviously the most interesting and kind of all-encompassing storyline to track with this team once the season gets rolling.
Yeah, I think if it was any way that we could measure how much better this team is, at least on paper for right now, it would be going by Thad Young, where he was the second best player on this team before the Vooch trade. Now, if you were to slot him into this roster that we have now, where would he slide in? Third, fourth, fifth? You know what I'm saying? So that just speaks to the work that the front office put in and the reason for everybody's expectations being what they are, no matter what, some of the national pundits have to say. So, it's good times. It's exciting.
Yeah. And man, could I get what you're saying there, Drew, with that, but man, could they still use that right about now? I mean, but the thing is, think of all the nights. Even Satoransky, I think, falls into this category of guys that, man, if you're really relying on them to shoulder the load in a heavy way on a nightly basis, it's not that these guys aren't good and productive players, but they're just miscast. Now, having that problem in the other way, where you have guys that are too talented maybe for their spot in the hierarchy, I think that's an easier problem to solve in a league where talent is paramount than the other way around. So I think that's a good problem to have for the Bulls. It's just about putting the pieces together.
Let me ask you this. Sorry, Kyle. It's hindsight is 2020. In a moment of honesty, do you think that AK would feel any type of way of not getting Nance back in that deal? I know he was able to recoup draft capital for Lauri, but Nance could fill so many different roles for this team. With Pat being out, just thinking of what Nance could do in that role, and given the amount of forwards they have, they kind of bunched up in their forward guard combos. It just feels like that could have been a piece there. Experienced guy, a vet who brings different things to the table. He can slide into the five when Vooch is off the court. Do you think in a moment of honesty that, AK might say, I wish I kind of went that route?
Yeah, and you're talking to like the biggest Larry Nance fan in the world. So I agree. He would have been such an awesome ad, and I think he makes Portland a lot better. I can't speak to the thought process on the Nance versus Derek Jones Jr. plus the pick. I can't speak to that in a like reporting way because I'm not all the way there in terms of having the thought process completely pinned down as to what exactly they were thinking there. My educated speculation, like my guess would be that they just valued getting that first round pick back with the specter of that tampering investigation looming, with having traded away so much draft capital in the last, I guess it would have been 6 months, dating back to the deadline, giving up those protected firsts for Vooch. I would guess they valued that over any specific or one player. And I would guess that the expiring nature of Derek Jones Jr.'s contract, I would guess that appealed to them too, and they still think that he'll be able to contribute. I mean, Billy mentioned him as one of the 3 options that immediately came to his mind to fill in at the 4 with Pat gone. I think he could probably do that in obviously a limited capacity. You're playing pretty small if you do that, but I think that's certainly an option. So that's my guess, is that keeping money off the books past this year and getting that first round pick back as insurance / a little bit of a cover for how much draft capital they've invested in building this roster so far. I would guess that they just value that over any one player. Now, that said, if it were me in that seat, I would have had a really hard time not, getting Larry Nance Jr. or doing everything I could to get Larry Nance Jr. in a Bulls uniform if it was possible. And the reason I say it's kind of ironic that the long-term quote-unquote salary wouldn't be an issue is that Nance is actually on one of the most team-friendly contracts in the league right now. I think he's descending from $9 to $10 million after the season for the next one. So he's certainly really affordable and really versatile and really would have plugged a lot of holes for the Bulls. It didn't happen for whatever reason. The other thing I would add, and this is from my colleague Casey Johnson, the way that he kind of reported or talked about the way that the sign and trade negotiations played out is that the Bulls were in talks to send Lowry to Portland originally. And so, who knows how those kind of conversations all came together. I don't know how that goes from Lowry going to Portland to Lowry going to Cleveland and Larry Nance going to Portland. But if the conversations just played out in a way that weren't ordered, in a way that was conducive to getting Larry Nance Jr. to the Bulls, that's possible too. I'm not, privy to those conversations necessarily, but those would be my best guesses. Really, mostly just valuing the draft capital thing. That would be my best guess. But it certainly stings when, as a fan or as an outside observer, you see him kind of right there on a platter, and then you just don't quite get there. Because think of him starting at the 4 or even being the third big off the bench, but still playing starter minutes and being able to toggle between the 4 and 5. He'd really solve a lot of issues, but for whatever reason, it just didn't come to fruition.
Yeah,
a lot of people would like to see that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. But for me personally, I think one of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to is we talked about earlier, the player relationships that Billy Donovan has with his players. He has a coaching staff that is, many considered top tier, and one of those guys being very known in the city of Chicago is Mo Cheeks. Kobe White last year talked about how Mo Cheeks really helped him improve from a point guard perspective, especially since that's a role that Kobe White's not fully accustomed to as far as the traditional style that Billy Donovan was looking forward to. And Mo Cheeks played a good role, and you saw improvements over the year, even though it wasn't obviously enough to where we came to the conclusion and know that, Kobe White is not going to be the point guard of the future for this team. However, the fact that there were some changes made to his game that actually helped elevate the Bulls in some way, shape, or form, especially when this role reduced from being a starter to going back to the 6th man on the bench, that was something that the Bulls benefited from. Talk about how Mo Cheeks, now that you have a point guard like Alonzo Ball, who is high, like you mentioned, high IQ, very good on the defensive end, and he's improved offensively year after year after year. Talk about maybe how much of an impact Mo Cheeks can have on a point guard like Lonzo Ball in a similar way that maybe Mo Cheeks have had on Kobe White. How ideal could that be for the Bulls this season, especially with the knowledge and the respect that Mo Cheeks brings to the table for this roster?
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. Yeah, we should really ask Lonzo about that as we get deeper into camp and he has more time to get acclimated here about how that relationship is evolving, because obviously Kobe talked multiple times very effusively about his relationship with Mo Cheeks, and obviously not only is Mo just like a super accomplished point guard for his time and a guy who's succeeded at the highest levels of the sport. Yeah, he's also a defensive-minded guy, so that was always something that for Kobe, I think was a point of emphasis, and that's something that fans would want to see Kobe White emphasize. Yeah, I mean, I think that marriage between Mo Cheeks and Lonzo can be super fruitful, because as much as Lonzo's offensive fit is probably where most people's minds go to first, because he's going to help the Bulls play faster, ideally. His playmaking is really going to make a lot of things happen in a play connecting sense. His outside shot helps the Bulls spacing. Like, he really just helps them in a number of ways. He's also emphasized that, the defensive end of the floor is going to be a big part of his role. Billy Donovan has talked multiple times about Lonzo being a big physical presence at the point of attack, on the ball, which is obviously an area the Bulls struggled last year. So obviously Billy sees something in him. And I mean, really, when you just look at how hard after Lonzo the Bulls have been since the deadline and shelling out for him in free agency, obviously, they clearly have big aspirations for him. Lonzo mentioned yesterday, again, this is on the offensive end, but mentioned playing a little bit more of a traditional point guard role with the ball in his hands, creating a little bit more than he was in New Orleans, where he, has said he was kind of more of a 3-and-D guy. He's copped to that. So that could be one form of the aspiration, and another one could be really setting the tone defensively. Billy has not only talked about kind of Lonzo's individual strengths and individual attributes, but also the effect that he's going to have in setting a tone for the rest of the team defensively. Because I think, again, like I said, Billy has historically been a pretty good defensive coach. Those Thunder teams that he coached, I don't think any finished below 11th in defensive rating, even the Bulls last year. And you could say it was a pretty ragtag group at points, finished 12th in the NBA in defensive rating. It's above average. So I think that's something that he certainly will have pinpointed as a potential weakness of this team. And I think he's going to be impressing that from day one. He's at least been impressing it in talking to us, how important it is to, emphasize the defensive end, make your presence known on that end, and then also do it by committee. I mean, you're going to have to see that on the glass with how undersized the Bulls project to be. It's going to have to be done as a unit, but certainly the way that Billy talks about him, the way Arturas talks about him, Lonzo that is, and the way Lonzo talks about himself, I think he's going to be expected to make a pretty substantial two-way impact. And I mean, for a young point guard, like, who better to learn how to become that type of player than from Mo Cheeks? So I think that's a great point. We haven't talked to Lonzo about his relationship with Mo yet, probably because they're still just getting to know each other. But I'll be super fascinated to kind of see if that becomes a trend throughout this year, like it did for Kobe last year.
I want to go back to DeRozan a little bit, because of all the pickups the Bulls had, his seemed to be the most criticized in in national media and everything. And I was just wondering, did that come up in any way with any questions with him? And also, he seemed to be pretty, speak amongst the players, speak as purposefully as any of the players in regards to like changing things in Chicago and changing the way the team is perceived and the way that they compete and everything. We just talk about how that could be manifested through defense, and that's going to be very important. It would seem to also be very important the way that the team feels about itself and the way that the team just has, I think you mentioned earlier too, like a chip on the shoulder, a certain attitude that is conducive to tougher basketball, more competitive basketball, and the team not having the sort of bad stretches for any given time, any real discernible time like they had after the trade deadline last year when Zach was out and the guys just sort of fell apart. I'm sure they want less of that this year. But in regards, starting with DeRozan, what was your the way that you took? What was did you take away from the way that he was talking and anybody else on the team who may have sort of spoken in a similar way?
Yes, I think the thing with DeMar is he is really, really out to emphasize that the fit is not an issue. And I don't know. So I don't know him well. So I don't know his habits in terms of how much he reads or how much he watches or how much he even, internalizes or cares about criticism from people like us. Because if you were an NBA player, I'm not sure why you would be watching ESPN and taking, pointers from it or taking criticism all that seriously. But he certainly, every question, and not even necessarily pointed questions, but any question related to how these guys are going to mesh, how they're going to fit together, has been met with a pretty impassioned, I think, rebuttal from him that usually centers on, the high character nature of the guys on the team, the unselfish nature of the guys on the team. Like I said earlier, the chip on the shoulder nature of the guys on the team, and the fact that at the end of the day, it just comes down to playing basketball. And he really is big on the idea that if we're all talented basketball players with a singular focus, everything's going to work itself out. Now, to your point about, the Bulls kind of unraveling and falling apart at various points last year, with a guy like DeRozan, who's in his, second, I guess, 13th season in the NBA, people like to clown those Raptors teams in the moment, but at the end of the day, he's been to conference finals. He's won at a higher level than most on this roster.
At least got to the playoffs.
Exactly. I mean, other than Caruso, who that's the first word out of anybody's mouth when they ask about Caruso is he's bringing that championship experience. So that's kind of a funny thing. But the thing that DeMar, when he says stuff like that, it carries a little bit more weight than when you're saying that as a Bulls team that entered last year as one of the youngest in the league and that was starting, I guess at least 3 to 4 players under 23, 24 years old. Just the heel turn from how young and inexperienced they were and looked on the floor last season to what they project to look like this year is stark. So I think that's my biggest takeaway from him is that he brings a level of assuredness and confidence that, maybe, you need your coach to rein you in at a certain point, not from being confident, because that's what makes DeMar DeRozan and any of these players who they are, but the idea that, he said, I think he said in his intro press conference, something to the effect of that fit doesn't matter and that, nothing schematically matters as long as we're all talented basketball players and we have that singular focus. Like I said, I think that's a great mentality to have, but at the end of the day, you do need a guy like Billy Donovan to say, no, there are there are adjustments that these guys are going to need to make. There are schematic things that we're going to need to figure out here. We can't dismiss that. So I think that's a good balance to have. I'm sure they'll strike it. But the biggest thing that stood out to me about DeMar is his confidence, and I think that can really, really trickle down to this team that will be looking to him as one of the, if not the primary veteran and kind of guiding voice. I mean, Patrick Williams has already talked specifically about how much he wants to learn from him, not only in his game, but in his demeanor and kind of the pace and just the pace at which he plays. Obviously, Zach, I think, can learn a lot from DeMar too, and you can go down the line with that. So I think he really has the potential to be a bit of a sage and a bit of kind of a steady guiding hand, especially just with the level of playmaker that he's become over the years. Just, again, that level of versatility and the way to affect a game in multiple ways when you're on the court, and then also have a pretty respected voice off of it. I could really, really see him growing into a leadership role with these Bulls based on what we've heard from him since he's gotten here. And I think that'll be another thing. I mentioned the Lonzo Mo Cheeks thing maybe being too soon to tell. I think that's another thing that's a little bit too soon to tell because we're still seeing how these guys are going to kind of organize themselves in the hierarchy of the locker room and the hierarchy of the team. But the level to which DeRozan can be probably not on the same level, but a guy like he mentioned in his intro press conference having sort of a Chris Paul-esque effect. I'm not saying that he's going to take him to the finals or anything like that, but being a guy that's been there before on a team where a lot of guys haven't, and being able to steward them through the course of a long season and being able to weather the adversity and ups and downs that really, really plagued the Bulls last year. If he brings a level of steadiness and consistency, again, not on the Chris Paul level, but on a level that, Bulls fans would still be happy with, a mid-seed in the Eastern Conference level, and, a reasonable amount of competitiveness in a first or second round series. I think that's valuable, and it's something that I could easily see him bringing based on first impressions.
I think if you ask a lot of Lakers fans who could be a Chris Paul-like figure, they would say probably Caruso on this team, because a lot of Lakers fans love Caruso, man.
They love
Caruso.
Caruso.
I just wanted to ask right quick, what did you think about him in yesterday? If you got to talk to him at all, or if you saw any quotes from him, and do you think he could be, because Chicago fans, we sort of take in guys in a lot of different ways. A lot of different players have become cult favorites for the Bulls for different reasons. And I think Caruso definitely fits a certain type that could be a fan favorite here in Chicago, scrappy, defensive minded, whatever. Maybe some of the suburban cats will be drawn to the bald head too.
He's a gym rat. He's
a gym rat. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, like the
that
gym rat type thing. With the headband and everything. But just what are your thoughts on Caruso and what he could add to this team? Like I said, we know he has the championship experience. That's something you can't take away from him. But what on that?
100%, and he became a much appreciated teammate of LeBron James, which is aside from everything that he's probably learned from LeBron, just earning his respect and favor that's significant. So we haven't talked to Alex Caruso yet. I imagine we will in the next day or two, because he's obviously a pretty important part of this team and a pretty key addition, but has not been one of the 7 that we've talked to yet. But in terms of what he brings to this team, I think a lot. I think he'll be, especially with Kobe White out to start the season, and we'll see how he reintegrates into the backcourt when he gets back. But I think Caruso is kind of the first guy off the bench, the top reserve. I think if his 3-point shooting, which was on low volume, but at a 40% clip from last year, he could probably help you offensively. He's got some bounce. The way that management talks about him, he's got some playmaking ability, and he's a high IQ guy. So I think he can fill gaps on the offensive end. Obviously, he's a defensive-focused guy, and he directly addresses that point of attack defense issue I mentioned earlier that Billy harped on all of last season, especially when talking about pick and roll coverages. That's an area the Bulls really, really struggled. Caruso is like one of the best in the league by the eye test, by the metrics, by whatever you want to use. He's really, really, really good getting through screens, getting into guys. Pretty good size for a point guard. I think he's 6'4". So I think he'll really be a boon to lean on in terms of being a guard defender. So that's a massive thing that the Bulls can use off the bench. They could use him, depending on matchup, for starter minutes, and maybe he's closing games. I mean, Billy, I mentioned earlier that he mentioned Derrick Jones Jr., and I think he said Stanley Johnson too as options at the 4 if Patrick misses any time. He also mentioned the idea of sliding Caruso in there, and then you're working with a 3-guard lineup of him, Lonzo, Zach, DeMar at the 4, and Vooch at the 5. That's obviously really, really small, and you're probably strained defensively and on the glass in the front court. But the fact that even popped into his mind at all shows you how much trust they probably expect to have in him throughout the season. I think defensively, toughness-wise, that's clearly been a focus. You lose a guy like Daniel Tice, who I think brought a lot of those things, obviously in a different way because he's a different player entirely. But you get a little bit of that back. And no, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bulls fans come around to him quickly. The one thing that I saw from him on media day was, he obviously didn't speak, and there haven't been any quotes from him yet, but I saw Bulls Twitter account was having fun with him, and him and Benny the Bull were kind of getting into it and having fun. So he seems, and even talking about his intro presser, he seems to have a personality and a congeniality to him. So I think combine that with kind of the fact that he's going to be scraping his knees, taking charges, getting after loose balls every night, getting into opposing guards defensively. I could see him playing a sneaky big role on this team, even if the counting stats aren't there in the way that they are for some other guys. And I could see fans warming up to him very, very quickly. Although I haven't met many fans that aren't warm to him, but I'm sure, some more casual fans who haven't seen him play as much and you see $9 million a year probably got a little aggrieved. But I think that'll all be assuaged once we start getting into games.
Speaking of fan favorites, right? Another guy that kind of got lost in the shuffle with the trade deadline acquisitions was Troy Brown Jr. And he seemed to kind of take some Bulls fans by surprise. I thought he played really well, speaking of point of attack defense and just kind of being all over the place, his hustle, even some of his shot making.
Yeah, he's hitting shots for sure.
Yeah. What? And I know it's tough because, like we said, they're kind of man, it's a logjam at the position that he'll play. But where do you see him fitting in off the bench? Do you see him maybe Billy using them as a point here and there, especially with Kobe being out? How do you see that playing out?
I think that's an option. I think the luxury of the roster now is that you have guys, even in the starting lineup, call it Zach and DeMar, like that you could stagger them and you don't necessarily have to put the ball in Troy Brown Jr. or even Kobe or Caruso's hands for an extended period of time. You can afford to pick your spots with them. I suppose I could see it. It's just not only has it been so long since we've seen or heard about Troy Brown Jr., in the same way it's been a long time since we've seen or heard about anybody else on the team because of the offseason. He missed just a large chunk of games in the context of how long he's been with the Bulls at the end of last year with, I think it was a sprained ankle that kind of devolved and evidently became worse over time. So he's obviously, I would expect him to be healthy now. We haven't talked to him yet either. We will soon. So I would expect him to be fully healthy now, but I'd still be curious to see what level of trust and faith Billy Donovan has in him as a rotation guy. The role is obviously there for him a little bit more now because I think there are wing rotation spots up for grabs. I mean, when you think about the small forward position behind DeMar DeRozan, it's potentially Stanley Johnson if he were to make the team. Obviously, he's kind of on a camp deal right now. You've got Derek Jones Jr. in there. You've got Troy Brown Jr. I mean, Javonte Green, I'd expect him to be kind of an end-of-the-bench guy, but I think based on what we saw from him last year, like you said, Drew, with the point of attack defense, I thought was great. His general just kind of hustle and intensity, I think, brought a nice layer to the Bulls. And then offensively, if he's really doing anything at all in terms of shooting, I know that's been a big question mark for him. I think he could be an asset, but we just got to see. I mean, Billy hasn't really spoken about him too much yet. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. We haven't asked him about him, but because of how shortened his last season was and because he really got hurt just as he had earned Billy's trust enough to get into a rotation spot on a regular basis, he was playing kind of 15, 20 minutes a night. We'll just have to see. But in my own personal opinion, I think of him as the front runner for backup small forward minutes just because we don't know what the Bulls are going to get from Derek Jones Jr. We don't know about guys like Stanley Johnson or Alize Johnson. Alize is more of a four anyway. But I see him as the front runner for that at this point. We'll see. Camp is about competition, and clearly that's one of the more significant position battles to watch is for those bench wing spots. But Troy certainly has the potential to make big things happen in there. It's just a matter of what he looks like once we get rolling.
Rob, I mean, obviously the Bulls made some pretty interesting moves. And one of them is actually not a free agent move, but it's actually a draft pick move in drafting Ayo Dosunmu, the hometown kid from Morgan Park and the state champion who did his thing at U of I and brought them the Big Ten championship, player of the year, I think he's the point guard of the year, All-American. He has all the accolades of what it means to be a Chicago star. But now he's back home, and this is his first season playing with the hometown Bulls. Did you get a chance to talk with him at Media Day? And where do you see his fit, especially since now that the Bulls have transitioned from a very hefty big man lineup to a more quick-paced, guard-oriented lineup? And you talked about the different lineups that they may be willing to make, especially when it comes to 3 or 4 guard lineups with Caruso and those type of players, and even moving DeMar to potentially to the 4. Do you see Ayo maybe even playing a role in some of that, or if not, what do you think his ideal role will be with this Bulls team heading into this year? Considering that he seems like he's NBA ready, even though right now it's not a force for him to really play at this present moment. Where do you think that the Bulls' direction is going with him?
Yeah, so we haven't gotten a chance to talk to him this week yet, obviously early in the week, but we did talk to him at Summer League, got a chance to obviously watch him up close at Summer League, and his focus there was defensively, getting into guys, bringing energy, and getting out on the break. I mean, that's where he looked the most NBA ready to me, was when he was running in transition. His speed is really standout, and he was able to get easy buckets that way. In terms of a role on this team, I mean, to be totally honest, I think it's going to be tough sledding, barring injury, just because Summer League, as much as he had moments and he had a couple nice stat lines, especially towards the end, I think in half-court settings and for the most part, it looked like there's still some developing that's going to need to go on there, especially offensively. And the team's guard room is so crowded. honestly, if Io splits time, in the G League this year, obviously the Windy City Bulls are back. They just announced a new head coach today. I think there will be a lot of excitement around that. And for a development or for an organization that says they're, focused on development, I think there's a chance for him to get reps in there. And then, like I said, if an injury clears a spot, if maybe he gets spot minutes, in blowouts or maybe kind of in matchup dependent games here and there, it's possible. But frankly, just based on the summer league results and just how crowded the backcourt is going to be, I have a tough time seeing him establishing himself on a nightly basis with a role in year one. But for a guy like Io, who's was a draft pick of the franchise, like is on a guaranteed contract, you can afford. It's not doomsday for him if it's not or if it doesn't all come together in year one. You can afford to take a kind of long view developmental approach to him. So that's just where I see things now. He's another guy, though, that, if he does get some action in preseason, if we do start seeing him more popping up in practices and hear guys talking about him more, maybe there's room for him at some point. But personally, it's hard for me to see right now where that consistent role is going to come from. I almost think he'd be better served, being with the NBA club, obviously, if there's a need for him based on matchup or based on injury or based on, things that can happen over the course of a season. But spending a lot of time in the G League and really working developmentally on his offensive game and filling out his frame and getting better defensively too. I think that could be what's best for him in the long run, but we'll just have to see, because obviously he's another guy, like, you invest a draft pick in someone and you immediately bring him on. The Bulls have high hopes for him. It's just a matter of whether that's going to be this year or further in the future.
Rob, who was named the head coach of the Windy City Bulls?
His name's Henry Dahmerkant. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm actually going to have a story. I talked to him today for a little bit at Bulls practice. I'm going to have a story going out about that tomorrow morning. Henry, he was a player development coordinator for Billy Donovan this year. Before that, he was an assistant for 2 seasons with Windy City. Before that, he was with the Celtics G League affiliate. And he had a pretty long playing career, transient, like he was overseas mostly. Of playing in Europe and Turkey and things like that. And before that, he was actually a pretty successful college basketball player at EIU, Eastern Illinois. He was a really, really, really high-level scorer. But, yeah, he's kind of risen up through the ranks of the Bulls' developmental vertical. He filled in for a game or two at the end of Summer League for Damian Cotter, who's an assistant to Billy Donovan. And, every player you hear talk about him, Billy seemed to be really fond of his work and his character and the way that he carries himself. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with that program, because after taking a year off, I'm sure that Arturas and Mark, just given how much they've talked about development, I'm sure that they see the Windy City Bulls playing a role in developing talent, even if it's kind of rotation level guys and not, any stars coming through the pipeline immediately. I'm sure they do see that playing a role organizationally. So it'll be interesting to see the job he does and how they fill out that roster. Obviously, if Io splits time there, if Marko Simonovic splits time there, Devon Dotson's on a 2-way contract. They've got another 2-way contract to fill by the end of camp here. So there will be guys to watch. I think there's reason to keep up with the Windy City Bulls this year. If you really are that deep, in the Bulls world, I think there's going to be reason.
Yeah, you're right. If you are that deep, yeah. And you mentioned 2 guys that you were right in my head. You mentioned 2 guys that I was just about to bring up: Devin Dotson and Simonovic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Simonovic. Yeah, the second round draft pick from last year. So the Bulls are still in the Devin Dotson business, which I appreciate, because I like the kid. And what have you heard about the big European? As far as his, I know he's not anywhere near being a guy who's going to be getting minutes at the UXC, at least consistently. But what if anything, have you been hearing about him?
Yeah, I think just physically, I think he's a guy that's been playing professionally for a number of years. And even if there is work to do there developmentally, I think that experience helps him. Physically in Summer League, he seemed to match up pretty well. The concern, I think, that I've heard and that I've seen is with the jumper. I think that's a big swing skill for him. He shot it pretty well over in the Adriatic League, like kind of mid-30s on decent volume. But in Summer League, it's a different length 3-point line. It's a little bit further back. The shot looked a little flat. And so obviously that was 2 months ago, and the Bulls will have, plans for him moving forward. So I would bet that's a point of emphasis in his development. Like you said, I don't know that he will be a surefire rotation guy this year. I mean, in the case of a guy like Marco, he's in a little bit better. Maybe better is not the right word, but a better of a situation in terms of, happening into a role at some point this season because the front court is thinner than the backcourt for this team. But yeah, I think physicality wise, he plays hard. He's going to be able to eventually, I think, rebound and run the floor at a level that is, pretty solid for a big man in the NBA. I mean, that was another thing that stood out about Summer League is he really gets up and down the floor pretty fast for a guy his size, 6'11". It's just a matter of how the jump shot comes along. It's a matter of he can build on flashes, ball handling, and passing and things like that. And it's a matter of if he can beef up enough to really be an impact guy, protecting the rim and rebounding as opposed to just making the occasional nice play here or there. So, again, Marco's another guy that you're going to have to watch for flashes or maybe G League moments and things like that. But he's a guy that when I watch his Adriatic League tape, it's obviously a lower level of competition, but there's something there. You could see the skill set that would intrigue a guy like Arturas Karnisovas because he is multifaceted, he is versatile, but it's definitely going to be an adjustment at the NBA level. It's definitely going to take some time. Fortunately, the Bulls do have what should be a pretty reliable backup center in Tony Bradley. You have Nikola Vucevic, and they hope they can piece together the power forward rotation. Other than that, maybe you even see another guy come in at some point. But yeah, he'll be an interesting guy to monitor. But again, got to take the long view with him as well as IO, in my opinion.
Sure. You guys got anything else you want to offer about the roster before I get into the COVID stuff or the vaccine stuff?
Nope.
Yeah. Well, with that said, with that said, did that come up at all with the Bulls? The Bulls are in a pretty good position. Like, overall in the league, the report is that 90% of the league has been vaccinated. Where are the Bulls standing exactly with that?
So Arturas was asked about this. He said the Bulls are not 100%, but quote unquote getting closer. So the way that he spoke about it, they didn't seem to be overly concerned, but not at 100%. Zach was asked about it in terms of an individual player and said that he was going to keep it a personal decision and that he thought that the team was going to do the same thing. So it seems like there's a solidarity there. So we're not, really sure, other than a few specific cases, I guess, if guys were to come out, who is, who isn't. It doesn't seem like it's a concern for the Bulls at this point. I guess we'll see I haven't even dug into these new protocols that came out tonight, but those will be interesting to dive into and see kind of what incentives there are going to be for maybe the last hangers on to get vaxxed. But the Bulls did fly under the radar in that respect, which, considering some of the other noise around the league with guys like Bradley Beal, for example, I'm sure they were happy to fly under the radar on this story. But it sounds like
no Kyrie disciples, huh?
And Kyrie would be another one. Yeah, exactly. At least not vocally. So I think that'll be another one where once we get into the season and different protocols start manifesting in different ways, maybe it'll become more of an issue. But the Bulls don't sound too concerned about it right now. Just based on the way that Zach answered his question, the way Arturas answered his, I would imagine the team is going to be pretty tight-lipped in terms of individual cases. But you just got to hope that doesn't impact the season, because you saw, what Zach landing on the COVID list did to derail the Bulls' playing chances last year. Obviously, that was super frustrating for him, especially because, as KC has reported, I'll cite him again, that Zach actually got the positive test in between his first and second vaccine shot back in the spring or whatever it was. So, it's obviously a really nebulous thing, COVID, and you hope that the Bulls aren't impacted. You hope nobody's impacted, and you hope, people that are spreading misinformation and things like that can come to their senses at a certain point. But we'll see. It's certainly a cloud hanging over the NBA right now. It's something that they're trying to not get under wraps in the sense of like control messaging or anything like that, but just I saw Michelle Roberts came out with a statement today framing it as, well, 90% of the league is vaccinated. So that's, a good thing when you zoom out. And really that is, a good percentage if you take the full perspective of it. So we'll see, especially if international travel comes into play with Toronto and things like that. It could be a big issue down the line, but just got to see how that plays out.
Toronto don't want to be stuck in Florida again for the whole
yeah.
The Raptors don't want to do that again. But a lot has been made, because of Higgins out there in the Bay, that San Francisco has their, as a city has their their restrictions, and New York has their restrictions, which is going to impact Brooklyn. I know in Chicago we have certain things. Just to be certain, is there like a vaccination requirement to be in the United Center, or
that is I think I remember it being reported a couple weeks ago that for fans at the UC, it was going to be a proof of vaccination or negative test situation. Okay. I'm not speaking authoritatively on this. I'd have to dig into it a little bit more. So I don't know. I don't believe so, based on the fact that the Bulls were non-committal on the 100% aspect of this. I believe that's a New York, California type of situation. But who knows, man, with this Delta variant, like who knows where things are going to go, especially once the winter hits.
Right. So that could change in the next month.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. When they took off for real,
Absolutely.
Yeah. You guys got any thoughts on this? Because quite frankly, if I was an owner or a GM or a coach and you were really being a hardliner about this, I'd be like, go on somewhere, man, because I'm not going to deal with it. Because I don't know what research are you going to do? You want to do research? Go study at the Center for Disease Control. Go get an internship there and leave me and my team alone, because you ain't gonna get us sick. But that's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a lot to unpack. On one hand, I want to give people the right to do whatever it is they feel they want to do. But on the other hand, it's getting to the point where it's getting annoying, some of the reasoning behind it. Reading that Rolling Stones article and some of the comments that were made.
Yeah.
It's almost like, especially in the case of Jonathan Isaacs, kind of him parroting things that Donald Trump said. And it's like the leadership at the top, again, being what it was and kind of trickling down to how people are feeling about getting this vaccine now. It's frustrating because there's not, when people are doing this research, there's numbers out there that they can see, that they can tangible data to prove that this vaccination has been effective and it can slow the rate of transmission. Nothing is perfect. Nobody ever said that by getting this vaccine that people weren't going to get this virus or that they couldn't spread the virus. That was never on the table. The whole point was to make it less so, to decrease these numbers, get us back to being, more in a normal state that we were in pre-pandemic. So, to hear Bradley Beal and Kyrie Irving, Jonathan Isaacs, hear these guys talk and some of the things that they're saying, I'd almost rather them just stick with the, it's a private matter and I want you to respect that, rather than some of the things they're tossing out, because that's when it really starts to get under my skin. Working in healthcare as I do, being around people who had COVID, treating people who had COVID, being tested 3 times a week, having to get vaccinated myself, falling ill to COVID this past Christmas and not being able to spend time with my son for fear of transmitting to him. Like, these things matter. Not being able to see my mom for the whole year and a half. Because she was scared to death of, just being in close contact with me because of me being in healthcare before the vaccine was available to us. It's just a lot of things that make me really upset. And like I said, I'm trying not to get on a high horse, but it really is getting kind of annoying, some of the things that are coming out of these guys' mouths.
It goes to the fact that you know, a lot of these guys still live. They live in bubbles, man. You know, not literal bubbles, but they have their own bubbles that they live in, and you know, that could affect them mentally as well as physically. It kind of helps them in some ways, maybe, but you know, a lot of world class athletes have gotten gotten COVID. It's, you know, you being young and fit doesn't mean anything, and the disease, for all intents and purposes, on a public scale, sort of started the widespread, you know, on a you know, a little bit. It kind of started in the NBA, you know what I mean, as far as we know, and you know, I think I ain't gonna get into responsibility or anything. You know, some people come at, you know, people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for saying that there's a certain responsibility in certain words he said that, but you know, these guys got to do better, man. I think, and you know, but again, it's not a bigger issue as it could be, because you know, if 9 out of every 10 NBA player is vaccinated and is willing to be vaccinated, that's, you know, they're in a good spot. But you know, again, this is the type of situation where the loudest guys in the rooms tend to be the wrongest guys, you know, and you know, it's hard to get over that. You know, it creates these tensions and these issues that don't need to be there.
One thing I want to add, you know, this is something that, you know, has affected the NBA. You know, we can talk about the bubble and the fact that science is what kind of brought them through and got them through that season. And then also Sekou Smith passing away from COVID, the devastation that Karl Anthony Towns has gone through, Jason Tatum having to rely on a inhaler to get through, you know, his bout with COVID. Like, these things happen. And I just wonder if these same people who are unwilling to take this vaccination, what they would say to Karl Anthony Towns if they're alone in a room with him. What would that conversation go like? And again, I'm trying not to get on my high horse, but it's just thoughts that I have about not only where the NBA is on this, but just us as a country and each state kind of doing their own thing, and some people just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, it seems like.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know. I can't speak for – I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but in the case of a lot of these types of people, like most people have been vaccinated. Like, you've been inoculated for things in your life. Like, you've gotten shots as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Simply to go to school, you've had to do that stuff.
Exactly. So it's like, and so to me, that's why when the FDA approval came through on Pfizer, I was hoping that would kind of spur more people, and maybe it has. I don't really know on a wide scale. Maybe it has spurred like a spike in people getting vaccinated, but to me, that's always been the wildest part. It's like, just because it's new and certainly, like, if it's reasonable for any aspect of this pandemic to be frightening to people or to inspire kind of skepticism or anything like that. Like, that's totally reasonable. But like you said, Drew, like, if you do the bare minimum of digging, like, it's just pretty clear to me, or at least it was clear to me. Like, I got it the first chance that I could, and I have absolutely no regrets about it. And I am glad that the majority of my loved ones are, because it just puts you at a peace of mind. And again, you're not impervious. Like, there's no doubt about that. But you know, it like you said, can lower the rate of transmission, makes it a little less likely to, or a decent amount less likely to get infected, and obviously lowers the chance of having an intense or, you know, super dangerous, potentially lethal case. So I don't see how all of those benefits without much of a downside that I've seen. I don't see where the zag comes from when everyone else is zigging. But again, I don't want to speak for everybody. Like,
what I'm saying, when you have a certain amount of, you know, there's an entitlement, I think, that's there for certain guys, where it's like, you know, I refuse to admit that I'm wrong, or I refuse to, you know, I'm going to always I'm going to be a contrarian, because that's my right as an American. And, you know, that's something that some guy, it comes in different flavors sometimes. You know, you can't confuse Kyrie Irving with, you know, an average citizen who may be in Texas, who may be a Trump, you know, maybe yearning for Trump and thinking that he's going to be president again by next January 6th. And, you know, you can't confuse those two type of people. But there's certain elements of their thinking that are aligned. And I said, God bless those people. I'm not gonna be really worried about those type of folks. And even though we all are connected in a certain way with this, to where you would wish that everybody would be more inclined to protect themselves, and in doing so protect others. But if you want to put yourself at risk, put yourself at risk, homeboy. Because I'm gonna protect myself, and so. Yeah,
do you guys think that LeBron James coming out today and making it public that he did get vaccinated, do you think that has any influence on that small percent that is still kind of undecided?
Yeah, I don't know, but I was actually just going to say, Drew, that I did appreciate the framing of which LeBron, made that proclamation today, in the sense that he said, yeah, like he was willing to kind of cop to the fact and be vulnerable to the fact that, like, yeah, I was skeptical at first, but then again, who knows what research means for every individual person, but LeBron has certainly the resources to get in touch with any infectious disease expert that he could possibly want to. Like, the world is at that guy's fingertips. So I think that framing, I would hope that LeBron saying that would influence people. I would also hope that the framing of, hey, like, I was skeptical, but it's possible to be a little bit anxious about this, a little bit skeptical of this, but be won over. I would hope that that's something that can resonate with people that are, on the fence or averse to it, because, man, like it's selfish, but I think there is obviously a greater good aspect to it too. But, like, can we just be done with this, man? Like, not like, it might never be done. Like, we might, and you never get back the people that we lost, or like the impact that was had, but it's just like, it's right there. Like, a better world is right there. And, I'm
Rob,
not.
That's the point of doing research, Rob. It's like, we've had, how long have we had accessibility to a vaccine of some sort? And people were talking then like, well, I don't know. How much more time do you need to know? What exactly are you doing to come to a decision? You're not coming to a decision. You're just standing out on the outskirts, being difficult. So, the point of doing research or inquiring about something is to be able to come to a decision eventually. But some people just don't want to come to a decision. So it's like, go ahead, live your life.
It's like we've never, with the internet, man, and just like, you could really think of it as you holding your cell phone in your hands. Like, you could think of yourself almost like as a robot. Like, you have so much knowledge at your fingertips if you want to access it. But at the same time, it's almost made us more dumb. Like, I don't know, because as much as every bit of information that you could possibly want is out there, the flip side of that is any piece of information that you could possibly want is out there. So there's always going to be something that's going to fit your narrative or your perspective or anything like that. And I think that, to me, that extends beyond the vaccine in terms of problems of division that we have. But yeah,
we trying to hold on. There's 19 seconds left in the Sky game. They're tied up with Connecticut. I'm not gonna if we go to overtime. I'm just gonna wrap it up, but we'll see how if the Sky can pull out a nice game 1 win. But guys, just another great run here. Appreciate you guys, Rob. Definitely appreciate you having you on. And we got something right quick.
Yeah, since we kind of scrambling around a little bit, Rob, just for shits and giggles, I went through the schedule and was okay. Let me see what record I can come up with. So this was maybe 2 weeks ago. I went 46-36, which I'm like, that's probably a little high. But first question: where do you kind of see the Bulls fitting in record wise? And forget the floor. Where do you see the ceiling? Like, is there ceiling to host the first round playoff series or something different?
Absolutely, I think. That's the thing about this team, right? Like, there's such a variance of outcomes that because it's such a new group, but because there's so much there in theory, potential-wise, I really think, like, in terms of championship equity, like, they might not be the third or fourth best team in the East entering the season, but the regular season doesn't always, championship odds or the playoff success isn't always dictated by the regular season. So things break wrong injury-wise for another team kind of in their bracket. Yeah, I could easily see the Bulls, be in that 4 spot, even potentially be in that 3 spot. I'm gonna make my on record predictions on record and seeding at some point, probably a little bit closer to the start of the season once we see training camp play out a little bit. So I haven't gone through the schedule game by game, but I will see what I will say. I've seen over unders for the Bulls anywhere from 39 to 42 wins, something like that. I would definitely be over that. I mean, that's basically asking if they're going to be an above or below 500 team. I think even if there's growing pains at the beginning here, I think 43 to, like you said, your 46 wins feels reasonable to me. And then, closer to the mid to high 40s as a ceiling there. But the defensive question is such a big looming cloud and question mark to me that, they can talk all they want about setting the tone and bringing intensity and coaching guys up and doing it by committee. That all sounds great in training camp. It sounds great in the preseason. But I think within the first couple games, we're going to know how much improvement needs to be made defensively to get this team to where it needs to go. If the offensive potential reaches its ceiling and they are, top 5 to 8 offense in the NBA, I think you're defensively, you got to be near average, if a little bit below, to get into that mid tier of the East. So I think we'll know pretty quickly how much needs to change there. But if everything breaks right, yeah, I could absolutely see them hosting a first round series. I mean, if the Knicks did it last year, like why I don't see why that jump isn't totally reasonable.
Yeah, the Knicks, the Atlanta. Look at what Atlanta did in the course, and again, I think this is like the Chris Paul conversation where I don't want to say like, oh, the Bulls are going to make the conference finals and have this magical run, and Trae Young, and they're going to have a guy like Zach make a leap like Trae Young did last year. But think about the way people talked in the punditry talked about Atlanta this time last year. It was a lot of the tone was a little bit similar to the way the Bulls were being discussed. Oh, they went all in too quickly. They're not ready yet. Oh, you overpay for Gallo. You overpay for this guy. I don't think anyone would call the Bogdanovich contract an overpay because that was a pretty good get even in the moment. But while I don't think this Bulls team is a conference finals team necessarily, even at the ceiling, I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I don't quite see it. I see a lot of similarities of the criticism between them and Atlanta at this time last year. It'll be interesting to see if they can make a similar kind of jump. Obviously, another difference between them and Atlanta is Atlanta had a pretty good stable of young talent in there before. Like they had drafted really, really well over the last 3 or 4 years. The Bulls haven't done that, and I think that's why you need to invest so much draft capital and salary to staff the team the way that they have. Depth is going to be an issue in the way that it wasn't for Atlanta. So I don't want to make that comparison directly, but I only say that to say it's not unreasonable that a team being criticized for going all in too quickly could surprise people and end up finishing better than expected. So we'll just have to see. Definitely. Well, yeah, the Sun and Sky are in overtime. So, not much more to say there for the moment. But like I said, not much more to say here as well. We're just going to wrap things up. Rob, again, appreciate you coming on, and you've been a great guest. Let everybody, we see the tag right there online, to get you on Twitter and whatnot. Let people know, what else you got going on. Of course, NBC Sports Chicago. If you got any other endeavors or anything that you want to plug, feel free.
For sure, yeah. At Rob_Schaefer, SCHAEF on Twitter. Twice a week, we do the Bulls Talk podcast over at NBC. Myself, Jason Goff, Tony Gill, Casey Johnson. It's always a good time over there. And then NBCSportsChicago.com, my team's app. Casey and I are plugging away, man. We're in midseason form with camp getting going this week. We pretty much are going to have multiple new angles and things to digest and consume on a daily basis. So looking forward to wherever the season goes. It'll be interesting.
The first game on the first game marked on the calendar, the Cavaliers preseason game, right?
Yep. The Lowry revenge game, the Denzel revenge game. We got all types of storylines for that one. It's gonna be lit for an exhibition, no doubt about that.
Is that the first one?
It is October 5th, week from today as we're taping this, next Tuesday.
That's good.
At the UC.
Yeah, we'll get to see something on the court.
We'll see.
So
We'll see if Lowry gets a nice, polite applause. I'm really curious to see how he gets received actually by Chicago. I'm not sure I have a read on the fan base as a whole on him because it didn't go as anybody expected or wanted it to. But at the same time, the Bulls are in a pretty good place right now. So how could you be too mad? But I don't know.
Regardless of what the crowd does, he's gonna get like a 9-minute tribute video, probably.
All from February 2019. Man.
It's gonna be epic.
You just gotta wonder if Denzel gonna drop a whole diss track too.
Oh man. I can't wait to hear Adam Amin and Stacey on the call if he pulls up from 35 and the garbage on that one. That'd be something.
Go pull a Nick Young. Just had to had the wrist all out and be like 3 feet off the rim. Give us hell, Denzel. Let's see what you got, man. Hey, y'all got anything else, man? Before we wrap up?
No, just appreciate you coming on, Rob.
Of course, Rob. Always glad to see you again, man. You know I got to get you back on the show when we start back up.
100%, man. You got my number anytime. It's always good to talk with you guys.
Yeah, we definitely gonna try to run with you again once the season gets going and get your thoughts on working that Bulls beat, man, and what you're seeing up close, man. So we'd love to have you back on here. We'll be back on probably sometime next week. Now that I see that that first preseason game is going to be on Tuesday, maybe we'll have something before that, or maybe the day after or something. I don't know. We'll work that out. But we're getting back to starting to get back to our weekly schedule around about the time. You can catch us typically on Tuesdays. We just wrap it up for this new season, man. There's going to be a lot of interesting, fun stuff, I think, on the horizon. Regardless of what, how finished the Bulls are as a team, I think we can expect them to be improved somewhat, and much more exciting team in a lot of ways, more versatile, more explosive, maybe more better on the defensive end. So a lot of things to watch out for Bulls fans. We're not just on the side anymore when it comes to the NBA. We're not, we may have a contender here, so we'll see just how far they can go. And in the meantime, we just gonna keep doing our thing here. WARR Media at WARR Media on all platforms. Follow us, subscribe on YouTube. You can get these videos, get ahead of these videos, and join us live if you like. And of course, anchor.fm/WARR Media. You can get all our shows, our streams, and podcast forms. So if you want to check them out at work or somewhere you can't get on the computer, listen to us or run back again. If you thought me or Drew or Josh said something extra clever, or Rob, of course, said something extra insightful, you can run us back anytime on anchor.fm. But in the meantime, go Sky, go Sox. We doing our thing here in Chicago, man. Go Bears, go do something. We try, in the meantime, let's try to pin our hopes on the Bulls, maybe doing joining this, like I said at the top of the show, joining the Sky in the playoff and really representing Chicago basketball the way that we like. So, like I said, in the meantime, Kyle Means right here. Follow me at Means Matters on Twitter and K-Mean on IG. And that's it. You see the guys there, Drew. Look what Drew did. Josh M. Hicks Media. Definitely follow them and show them some love out there. And in the meantime, keep bouncing. We'll see y'all next week.